a small expansion from last week and the week before. If any information is not exciting, it is ultimately useless. And how about back to the good old EC gate? And speaking of the gate in the sense of having two positions, of it either being open, which would be the exciting part, exciting aspect, or closed being the calming aspect of that particular gate in the nervous system, then it must be open for you to be growing. So you can look at it this way. And perhaps I'll expand a wee bit more on the word exciting, but if you're not excited, you're not growing. You're not changing, you're not doing this. And how about the people in other cities? Some of these people in California and New York, for two examples, have to some degree been exposed to this, have been acquainted with me personally for several years, and they feel as though that they have yet to actually be in the midst of the excitement. And withal, some of you continue to entertain voices that are serious enough that I know you find them disturbing, that at times you feel as though you have been overloaded with the excitement. And that surely somewhere along the line you have had moments of picking up enough information that excited you that if it all came together at one time, you'd be excited to death. And that there seems to be some justice afoot that then, at other times, it's as though you cannot drag up from your past even one little moment of this excitement. I'm going to go back to several things that I haven't talked about in a while and see if you can see that there is a connection, because I have left them at particular points for particular reasons. And some of you tonight will find it very coincidental. Some of what I will mention, as though you had already almost been thinking about that. But let me go just a little bit further with the EC gate. And I'm going to tell you something similar to try and pull out some of the mechanical underpinnings of what seems to be C, D, and E. But since I started with the EC gate, either position that seems to be in, that you either seem to be internally with the gate open and you seem to be excited for whatever reason, whether it seems to be externally based or whether it seems to be no particular reason, or whether you seem to be calmed. When you are open, what I want you specifically to consider, when the gate is opened, is to further pursue this, that it can be in the kinetic or in the recoiling mode. Everyone remembers the three modes that I mentioned on one night. As far as the inert mode, for tonight I'll leave it to you as to how that could possibly be. I'm not going into that. But if you consider, let us start with the gate open, that there seems to be excitement. Now, I bring this up, least some of you have mechanically fallen into trying to place the gate either being open or closed in regards to there being something creative and positive going on or something negative, and it is not that simple. Now, if the gate were open, it could be in the kinetic mode, and it would be like the excitement of creative change. But also note that the gate could be open. That is, you be in the area internally where it seems to be excitement running through the nervous system rather than a calming effect, but it could be in the recoiling mode. It could be that which many civilized people, most of the voices in you, the mechanical voices, would look at as being a negative aspect, the kind of people that you feel, or that you felt in the past, are the blight on the face of humanity. But the gate can be open, and it be in the recoiling mode. That absolute mechanical excitement of destruction. And yet ordinary consciousness, historians and people still wring their hands of how could people do the terrible things they do. And I point out to you, in a rough sketch, trying to get you to consider that people, in one respect, are wired up and seem to get an excitement out of a life of crime, not simply on the basis of making money, because it is a terrible way to make money. But there is a recoiling mode possible when the gate is open. And this is one area wherein ordinary consciousness between ordinary people would seem to get at loggerheads that would almost appear to some people to be the epitome of evil, that not only are these people engaged in dastardly acts, they seem to enjoy it. I would also, of course, note for you that it's not that foreign. It may not be part of your public voice or your public demeanor, but why? Well, you still stand there in line, and there's the headlines in the National Enquirer. Man kills all 14 children. And you could be reading the wrappers on gum or candy bars, and yet you'll stand and try to see if there's anything else there. And your public voice would highly disapprove of this. How about the gate closed? The first two, the exciting, is what I was intending to primarily point your attention toward tonight. But the gate being closed, that is, in the calm position, can you also see that in the calm position it could be in the kinetic, or it could be in the recoiling? The kinetic, for one example, might I suggest to you the numbers? Or if you want to take it into ordinary life, what ordinary people have always described and thought they were experiencing as forms of meditation, forms of prayer. But since almost all of you at some time have made some note to me regarding what seemed to be either an unusual experience with the numbers when you first started, or else just an expression of your general pleasure of it, could you see that in one sense it is not limited to this, but you could look at it as being the gate closed, but in a kinetic mode? And real parenthetically, since no one has yet to note this to me, but some of you coincidentally, as soon as I say it, once I start the sentence, some of you should probably hear it. Has anyone noticed that when you do it the way I described it, that what it is going to set up the potential for is to affect all three circuits, to affect all three infrasystems, the respiratory system, the muscles, obviously, but because you got to keep track. You got to count through the numbers of how long you're staying in that position, how long you're affecting the muscles in a specific way, and how long that you are affecting the respiratory system through the directions of the breathing that I gave with the numbers. How about the gate closed in the recoiling mode? Simple example, I suggest to you, boredom. Not only calmed, but the gate's closed, and it can be in what amounts to the recoiling mode. The underpinnings that I threatened to tug at. I mentioned to you last week part of the reason that I had never engaged in specific, stable, always continuing, always dependable terms. Now, the way in which I have stretched and pulled maps around have been apparently more obvious to some of you than apparently to others. And I noted for you that the yellow circuit is arranged in such a way, or the whole organism, but this would have seemed to have been the yellow circuit since it was having to do specifically with words. Had I insisted, had I had written a little handbook, a little vademecum for us, with terms set out absolutely that you should memorize whether you understood it or not, like the one I made up of self-neuralizing. Describe it, and the words almost make sense, and insist this is the keystone. It will take you years to develop the ability to self-neuralize, but you must know the term, and I continued to use it constantly. Never seemed to vary very quickly because of the demands of the ordinary world, the ordinary demands of the yellow circuit and life's own nervous system. It would have been, when I say shortly, no, I'm talking shortly. I'm talking about once or twice. The yellow circuit would have said, ah, and then every time I said it, every time I wrote out something new and you read it, it would see, self-neuralize, and as far as it was concerned, it ran right through the machinery, it made some kind of sense, and hence ignorance takes on the color of knowledge via words. Now back to what I was going to say about the three. Remember how many terms I've used. You probably can remember more than I can. Forces, persuasions, inclinations, C, D, and E. They're really just things. Not things in a noun sense, but just things. Now let me tell you how you should be going about it now, because all of you, to varying degrees, have believed that you have gotten something out of trying to observe life through that kind of mapping of there being three kinds of forces running. What you should do now is to absolutely pretend as though you do not understand anything about C, D, and E. That is, now we're getting to an active part of neuralizing. It's because as far as you're concerned, notwithstanding any kind of caveats I have given and all of my trickery, everyone's yellow circuit in here believes to some degree that it has some understanding, no matter how crude it may preface its claim to some knowledge with, that it has some absolute experience and knowledge that there are three forces going on. Just forget it. Just pretend, that is, neuralize every time that you want to use in the yellow circuit the idea of forces, as you can remember it, but don't think about it. Pretend you do not understand anything. It's just C, D, and E. They're just three things, not a noun, but they're just three things. And then, so I'm not saying not to use it, but pretend you do not understand anything and just go ahead and use the letters C, D, and E, but then affix to it always one of the three modes. And all of you should be getting close enough now to something that this should begin to set the map itself on fire. That it just would strike you all anytime that it seems apropos, that it seems to come to your awareness that here is something that is obviously connected, that other people can't see, that I wouldn't normally see, with there being C, D, and E. That this just has to be C. All right, pretend you don't understand anything about C. And then try and affix what you think you're observing. Affix to it one of the modes. Because I have tried to set up some kind of warning to all of this, that there is no such thing as a pure C, D, or E. And I put it other ways that neither could exist by itself. But now to refine it to the point of almost tearing it apart to where you can see beyond the map is go ahead, whatever strikes you that, all right, surely this is C. But then just pretend, act as though that I understand nothing about C, but it just strikes me this is C. All right, we'll go with that. You're probably right. You're probably somewhere in the right direction. But then, now you've got to worry about, all right, it's C and I don't understand anything. I'm not even sure what it means anymore. But this has got to be C. Then trying to fix something. And if this comes as a surprise to any of you, anything that is C is not necessarily what I intended the night I first brought up the modes. Just because it is C, it is not necessarily kinetic. It could be C recoiling. And if you can't find either one, then you might as well consider that it could be C inert, whatever the hell that is. Or here is D. Here is D without a doubt. I mean, it just has to be D. Even taking into account my own mechanical prejudice, the effects of my own OAI consciousness, this has got to be D. But forget anything about being destructive, that it's trying to hold on to the past. Pretend that all of that was just groundwork. That I just kept laying out ideas and you tried to pick up what you could. Now pretend that none of that happened. Don't listen to you. Don't listen to anything that you can recall that you thought I said. But it strikes you, this is D. Okay, probably is. Whatever the hell D is. Compared to the other two, let's assume that you're always right by now, that this is D. If it's anything, it's D. All right. But then pretend that you've got no understanding whatsoever of what D is. And then the immediate problem is to affix. And D is not always recalling. It's not always DD. It could be DC, like D with a little C up beside it. It could be DE. This will bring you closer to the reality of it. It could also be, I guess some of you would surely stumble or suspect you're about to stumble over this possibility, that not only could it be C with no thought as to what C is in any possible pure form, but C apparently in a kinetic mode. It could also be, this is not as strange as it sounds, and I grant you it sounds strange and complex for me to muddy the waters any further, but if you can ever get to the point of understanding this, then you don't have to hear anything from me or yourself anymore about it, because then you got it. And that is, it could be C with two modes going on. It could be C with the kinetic, like the major mode, and recoiling, in the minor mode. Then all so-called yellow circuit philosophical questions as to, is this the right way for a person to act? Is this constructive behavior on this person's part or any human's part? I mean, it can't be. You're right. There is no such thing as C. But it could be C with a dominant kinetic mode and a subdominant or a minor inert mode, or even a recalling mode. And you thought I'd forgotten about mathematics. But it's then all of these so-called unanswerable questions as to how can you justify, much less explain, this unbelievably egregious behavior on some person or some group of people's part. And there is no such thing. I mean, if you're lumping that as to D, back when you used to think about what D was. And now you can't think, it's just, all right, that's got to be D, I don't understand anything about it. Then to be able to see that there can be a mode, there can be two, there could be three. But you don't have to worry about three if you can get to the point that this is obviously D. I don't understand it, but it's obviously D, and I grant you it is. And you can see then two modes at work. If you can get to that point, then we don't have to discuss it. You don't have to worry about ever trying to fit in the third one, because if you see that, you see it all. Then all behavior is mathematically correct. The grid fits together in a certain way. But there is no pure C, D, or E, and you might as well forget it. They're just something. And it's not even worth discussing by itself. It has been up until now, but just a trick. Just to get you to the point that I'll assume now, to varying degrees, all of you believe that quite clearly that you can see these three great forces, these three great rivers, just flowing through everything, converging, running at loggerheads, cross currents. But boy, there they are. There's no doubt about it. And of course, to varying degrees, all of you now believe, well, I am past the point of believing that something is just purely D in the world, because it is in some way going to become a tributary of a new sea river. In some way, it is tearing down something to build something new. But it's these three great things wrestling, these three great gods, and it's not. So forget it. It's just C, D, and E. We'll continue to call it that. That's as good as anything. But as far as anything you thought you understood about it, pretend. Use it in the same way of controlling ordinary consciousness not hitting the screen. That you know, you can hear your own voices saying, well, there's C, and I know what. Just accept the first part. All right, there's C. I'll go with that. The rest of it, let them mumble. Then apply yourself to this. What mode, and then what major and minor modes can I see in this? I return you back to that which I at least made a semi-threat to some of you many moons ago. The substance in the blood. I told you that I could name it, and I never have for anyone. I haven't mentioned it in a long time, but now it's time to go back. You've had all this time to either remember it, not to remember it, to see if you could do anything on your own. And I told you it was both allegorical and otherwise. It is a physical reality. And I'm going to tell you my name for it. And it has to do with a certain quite real combination. I could make it, if I wanted to, into I could give it a truly chemical description. It would not mean anything. But I have had a name for it, and I'm going to tell you what it is. Even a symbol, it's not a name. And it's not called dropping the papers. I'm not going to tell you what it means. But that is the name of it. And that's what I have named it. Other people have named it other things. You've heard it named and you didn't know it. In fact, they didn't know it. But you've heard it named by so-called religious prophets, men of the gods. Psychologists even played with it. But there's what they're talking about. And since I have been trying to drag your attention into the absolute nexological reality that nothing exists, including imagination, people believing that gods talk to them, people believing that spirits talk to them, people believing that they have their own thoughts, that none of this happens until there is a biochemical alteration within the brain itself. That's the final stage. That if indeed the gods swept down and gave you the secret, as I pointed out, this same mundane process, the same one that causes some reaction when our proverbial men in the pickup truck go by and holler, take a walk. The effect, the process of the way that affects you would be absolutely the same process that would take place if indeed external gods came down and told you the secret. It's the same process. Right, this substance increases in the production inside of humanity. It has increased continually. It has increased in the same way that I have described the merry-go-round turning a notch on that worm screw in the center. The production of this has increased. It is in line with what appears to be progress. It is in line with what appears to be the growing intelligence of humanity. It is in line, of course, what Yellow Circuit wants to hear is for me to say it causes people, humanity, to become more sophisticated, more conscious. But any of you who still believe that are still tied up with the chicken or their egg question. And yes, this causes people to be more conscious, and yes, no, it does not. That the question is fallacious in that it is only 2/3 of a question. But the production has increased. That has been the progress. Everything from technological process, evolution of technology and science, to what would apparently be in some parts of the world, in some people, a more humane disposition. But as the production is increased, the use is increased. And thus, any generation is no better off. That there is more of AMV12 being produced in you than there was in Jesus and Moses and Buddha and your grandfather. But it takes more to keep you alive. It takes more to keep you conscious than it did them. I'm going to draw our old favorite again. Many of you have had experiences that you've tried to write me about, and I primarily have written you back or given you some notice of not let that which you cannot understand or that which you cannot control get the best of you. That in fact it is useless until you begin to understand it on your own. But it had to do with what seems to be unusual experiences, or people doing the numbers, people attempting to do some task, people attempting to act or to speak in ways that would conflict with the way they would normally want to speak, and to try to describe to me sensations you had. There are 3 adits, which is a synonym for a passageway. And I didn't want to say passageway. It doesn't have the right kind of rhythm. But there are 3 adits in the nervous system. And I have talked around the edges of this years ago with the bridge points, if you remember, that I said there were 2 points where you could have an effect that happens mechanically in people, and I pointed out of sex and laughter would be 2 examples, 2 prime examples, since somebody stumbled on it themselves. Between here, between there. But these 3 adits would be at the base of the spine, would be 1. The second one is at the top of the spine, and the third one is at the lowest point at the level of consciousness. Now what these passageways amount to, both allegorically and otherwise, is this is the 3 places where AMV12 is used up. Each of those 3 outlets takes out a piece of it. Now the bridge points, don't confuse them, just, I was trying to lay some groundwork back then. It's not really the bridge points, because that is a kind of mechanical jumping place that you could have observed something about. These are really what amounts to the lowest point in the 2 bridge points I mentioned. Right, in effect, where human life starts, where your particular life starts at the base of the spine, allegorically. first place, it's taken out, like in the mines. Some of this is extracted. It was extracted before the yellow circuit was working to the level to write, to make up words, or at least to write them down. It's still being extracted in you now. Second place is right at the top of the way I draw the nervous system before it gets to the brain. It is what could be correctly guessed as being somewhere in the neighborhood of the blue level of the factory. You're not incorrect to sense that there is some connection between that and the area of the respiratory system, the good old religious and poetic heart of man. But the third one is where what it takes now is the excitement of knowledge. And that's where it is taken out. That is the final extraction of this substance. And it takes it being taken out at all three adits for you to be, in any ordinary sense, for you to be here, for you to pass out in the street if you're not part of this, as a relatively ordinary, okay man or woman, is that within certain tolerances, among everything else, among the digestion of food, the internal workings, physiologically speaking, of the body itself, all of that, this substance is being taken out of the blood step by step, and when it reaches the level of consciousness, the last remaining drop of it, the last trace of it, is gone, and the process begins anew. Now, I have said this is no great revelation tonight, but you have got to minimize the way in which this is being used. And I can't start off, there's no way to tell anybody how to do it. There is no direct way to do it. It is an inherent, it is a natural part of there being a new biochemical process within you. But you have to minimalize. There's surely no such word as that. You have got to make minimal use, in the mechanical sense, of AMV12. And some of the trickery, some of the conditions, some of the rules, the few I have made, many of the tricks, the tasks were involved directly with this. All the way from me saying there should be one motto once you get some rearrangement within yourself. But there should be one attitude toward what ordinary people call health, and that's fuck health. You've got to be wired up genetically already to be healthy, to be here. I know there seems to be exceptions. There are people who are sick in this group. There are some of you who still think you're sick, which is not necessarily the truth as far as I'm concerned. But you have got to be wired up, in a sense, to be healthy. And what that amounts to, from one particular viewpoint, which is quite valid, is you can operate on a minimal amount at the first adit of taking out AMV12. That I am, of course, not suggesting this, but you could almost live a dissolute life. You could almost, by outside observation, almost be wrecking yourself. In some way, persevere. I might also note, since I guess many of you here and seen this tape know throughout history, the apparent would-be great gurus and prophets, not all of them, because the stories in much of the world is that they led quite pristine and upright and celibate life. But there's also a continuing kind of a side path of stories of these great prophets and gurus that were notorious drinkers, and they chain-smoked heavy cigars, you know, and they had 14 mistresses, and they never slept, and they just, you know, ate nothing but candy bars. And within many people's wiring system is a feeling of vibrating to, wow, yeah, now that is my kind of prophet, or that's my kind of guru. Now, I'm not suggesting one way or the other, but I'm pointing out that there is something that seems to vibrate quite correctly to many people. That, yeah, they don't know why. If we were psychology students, or if this was psychology, you could say, well, it's some kind of trying to project that, hey, if he can do it, then I'm glad that I don't eat good and I don't exercise because, hey, he could pull it off. But also in your more lucid moments, to give you the blues again, I assume you know that if you can't do it, you can't do it. If you can't do it, you can't learn how to do it. If you can do it, you don't have to learn how to do it. Back to what health should amount to is getting to the point, through many other things, that you can take out what amounts to an absolute minimal amount of this substance out of the blood. Because that is what happens. You're not directly controlling it. I don't mean that it's simply you having to stand around and spend your time in some way regulating, but this is what happens. When you get up to the second at it, the place where, you understand, if I made this clear enough, what this amounts to is like 3 major areas where this AMV12 is taken out for the sake of our conversation, for 3 different purposes, to feed 3 different areas, although they're all connected. The second area, do I even have to point it out? Do I even have to tell you about ordinary emotion, about suffering, about being mad, about being critical, about being sarcastic? When there is nothing wrong with it, it is not the world gone astray. It absolutely is necessary out there. It is necessary to most people. And I'm saying most people, excluding a very few number of men and women on this planet, that it is necessary that they be all of these things that we can put names on. Hostile, sarcastic, cynical, hateful, dangerous, mad. It is this substance being taken out at that point, and it is feeding a particular place in the body of man and in the body of life. And it seems natural, although parts of life condemn itself as always, and through psychology, through psychiatry, through everyday accepted common sense of any particular time, they can say, all right, so-and-so is too hostile, or I am too jealous, I should not be, and yet they continue to be. It is life continuing to do things that it condemns itself for from another corner of the universe. And within an individual, people do things, and I point out to you, as natural as breathing, to condemn that which you can't even stop, to condemn that which is as natural to you as opening your eyes in the morning and breathing. So the feelings that there are certain kind of emotions that a human should not be involved with is neither here nor there. If it was not necessary, people would not be doing it. But me saying that I have invalidated your suffering card, for me to, for a long time, to insist without any great explanation that I'm not even going to say the word emotion. I'm not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about love and friendship and all that. Just forget it. And then for me to go right back at the end of some meeting and say, all right, go out and do so-and-so, and I put other words on it by saying you go out and do imitations of what it amounted to of non-mechanical emotions, closer to the reality of love, of being non-judgmental, of engaging somebody in conversation to try and get them to talk about themselves, their apparent field of interest, in which you had no natural interest. That you could say, I'm even somewhere between being apathetic and even hostile to hearing somebody talk about the great life of being a shoe repairman. You know, give me a break. And to go out as an absolute task and encourage it, to continue to encourage it for a matter of minutes. Of tell me about this. How does it feel? What do you get out of it? It is getting back to the reality once this biochemical situation, this internal structure and process has been altered once and for all, is then you do, at that second at it, you then begin to operate, compared to ordinary people, with a minimal displacement, a minimal usage of this substance. That at that level, you are just minimally, by the ordinary definition, emotional. just emotional enough at the ordinary level to pass as human and to stay alive. Because it must be fed. It must be extracted there, or you would be dead. You would not be human. Now the third part, let's assume you've got it down, that some of this makes sense. To try and use only a minimal amount. It's down here. It's keep this part, keep the mind away from the muscles of reading every article you see that says, new testing shows that any food causes cancer. And you can't wait to get it home and read it. Or you find out there is a sale on these bands to take your own blood pressure. And you've just been waiting so you can have one and do it at least once a day or maybe twice a day. Taking your temperature, always looking in the mirror. First time you hear somebody in the office mention, there is a brand new disease going around, and you've got to hear what it is, because you might like it, you might have it. It's just keep all that away. Or to understand that there is no such thing as ambrosia. To have some understanding all the times I've tried to talk and give you general hints of it, to point out the popularity throughout the ages, it just seems to be in a resurgence now, of books of how to be a more spiritual person by what you eat. Back when we first started advertising those books I wrote for the public, some people in here found me, that's been 3 or 4 years ago, I told them to find what seemed to be New Age metaphysical magazines. And the last time I looked, was thinking about doing some more advertising, all but 2 out of 5 or 6 were out of business, which is no surprise. But one of them, I remember we advertised in, that seemed to be covering the wide range, and I went ahead and selected it, and we used it to advertise. But it is now down to, the whole magazine is nothing but, whatever their terms are, I just give you the gist of it, of how to be a more enlightened, how to be a more awakened person. But now every article is on the basis of health. And 99% of it is on the basis of diet. It didn't take it long. And it just seems to fit. I can sit there and read, I can glance over it and know exactly what's going on, know exactly how the world is full of enough people to keep buying it, to keep it in business, and read it. And it's gone from, at one time, covering areas about some philosophical idea or some new guru and the way he is trying to redo the Upanishads or some American version of Sufism. Now it's strictly down to, pancakes are good for your love life, or it's not just funny, but it is down to that it's health. But by now all of you should see that there is a built-in, there always has been, it's nothing new, but there is an absolute built-in thing for food. Look at kosher laws. And if you think that's insane, it's got a tremendous hold on people. That you start fooling around with what people eat, fool around with their sex life, and you just about got a large segment. You got all the minors. I mean, they want religion. There it is. Well, it's quite simple. I know life seems strange, and you hope when you die it's a better world. All right. Such and such, here's 2 rules regarding sex, and then here's 4 or 5, or maybe 104 or 5, regarding food. Hell, I keep a man busy forever. Worrying about what you eat, where it came from, how to treat it. No, I can't eat that. Does it have this in it? You'll keep the minor satisfied forever. They can even get a little yellow circuit excitement. You got to keep this list. You got to remind each other. At any rate, what I was trying to get all of you to see that there is a built-in immediate attraction to that. And that many of you, it's nothing unusual, I don't hold it against you unless you're still doing it, to want to pick up books that think, well, all right, this will help along with what we're doing. I'll get very involved with taking my own blood pressure. I'll take my temperature, and I'll keep looking at my tongue to see if it's the right color. It's a good hobby. But once you reach a certain point, it is not a good hobby, because it is taking out more energy down there than is necessary. That if you were not wired to be healthy, at a certain point, something is wrong. And you'll begin to feel it. Or on the contrary, I'm not trying to upset any of you specifically in here. Some of you that have always felt as though you're unhealthy could be one of those bad news surprises I used to mention. What if one day you turn around and realize that not only are you not sick anymore, you don't even think about being sick? That's when it's all right. You get up to the second adit, as many of you should see, if you have also got a prime passageway. You got a prime place wherein humanity, individually and collectively, but let's speak individually, is plugged in to certain kinds of religion. That you have certain religions that are made to be fed off of that, of coming it through individuals. And they believe, as far as they would describe it, I have found my religion. I have found my kind of philosophy. And what it is AMV12 being taken out, it's being passed in life through this particular person, apparently being involved with this particular religion. And instead of them apparently singularly, individually growing from it, it helps life grow. It passes energy. But they don't grow. They grow in the sense that all life is growing. But they are expending in a quite mechanical manner. This substance out of the blood is going in that religion. It's going in their everyday life. It is going through them being ordinarily, routinely emotional. When it gets up to the third level, that's why I was going to suggest to you, will probably strike some of you as being less specific. But it is taken out there also. It is taken out there in a way that it becomes of prime importance today to people involved with this. It becomes of prime importance along the lines of the kinds of tasks I have given you to attempt to go out and walk, to see what apparently is going on in here, all the numerous things I gave to see how quickly it goes, to see that you can't really locate it, to see that you only get a glimpse of it, and then it gets replaced by you attempting to look. And the question of, all right, then what is that looking? And you attempt to look at it, and then what happens? The attempt to continually stop and realize, well, I was daydreaming about my new car, about a specific thing about it, and then suddenly try, was I daydreaming? Was I this running static? Was it in pictures? Was it in words? Was it in both? All right, it was almost in pictures, but was it a specific picture of the car itself? Could I swear to that? Is it something, was I seeing a drawing? Was I seeing the reality of it? Why does it go so fast? All of those. Even into the area of me dragging in particle physics, of this apparent communication that's impossible, that I used that as just a physical base for the map that I sketched for you that there is within humanity, each person individually, up at what seems to be the yellow circuit level, among others, but specifically up here, that which that infrasystem accepts and that which it rejects. And what is not seen is they are in continuous, direct, simultaneous communication at all times. That not being seen takes out the last bit of AMV12, and there is nothing left to grow with. All mystical states of all stripe, all description, at every time, under whatever religious or spiritual banner they were flying, all of those states had to do with some of that substance getting past that third adit, and the person experienced a temporary biochemical alteration, but it was specific, as this substance got above that third outlet. And it makes all manner of dope look like aspirin. And it is absolutely, of course, inexplicable to them when they come out of it. When the substance falls back to its normal level, It is absolutely inexplicable. Nobody lies when they say, I can't explain it to you, other than say it was unbelievably delicious, it was unbelievably informative, it was unbelievable. How about the real justice of it? As I tell you, it's allegorical, and I tell you it's also beyond allegorical, that it actually exists. In fact, you should see now it exists even more because now you know the name of it. But nobody can see it. No ordinary man of medicine or scientist, because, do I have to tell you? I told you one time, but I don't think anybody heard it. Since it's already used up in them, and so if I could find some man of medicine, or some of you could carry the story to somebody, in some way we tricked them into getting their attention. They heard me talk or read something I wrote and thought, well, if he says it, the rest of this impresses me enough, I'll look for it. I'll devote some real time and I'll look for it. And they will never find it. But it's there. But it is gone by the time it gets up to their level of consciousness, and therefore they have no facility by which to see it. And they can extract blood out of people, and sure enough, they won't find anything that they hadn't already found. I don't know why I should do this to you, but what the hell? How about all the stories, and there are many of them, it's not just in one religion, in case some of you don't know, of the followers at some time drinking the blood of the founder, the holy person. Surely you speak in allegories again, great historians. Still, isn't that coincidental? What kind of barbarians? I mean, at least they came to their senses to go into the Christian world. You know, they used Mad Dog or some kind of wine. It was obviously just a picturization. But do you not find it coincidental, curious, that all over the world there are these stories? Yeah. Like you always say, so what? A quick paragraph. Everything that I've ever mentioned tonight, I just laid specifically on the C, D, and E stuff, and partly on the EC gate. I guess I'll have to come back to some more of it, but I'm telling you now what you should try to do is undertake an overall modal attempt at consciousness, that anything I've ever mentioned, anything that you think you understand, that yes, I can see this divided up into these particular sectors. I can see this as operating as 3 different forms of energy or 3 different possibilities. It's all of it. Pretend now that you don't understand any of it. You got a name for it, but anything that you now think you understand, forget it, and trying to fix the modes to it. The aisles of articulation. The night I mentioned that and gave you the drawing, if anyone remembers, somewhere in there I said, I intended it parenthetically, but I said that I started to name them the capes, C-A-P-E-S, of articulation, and I did not. So now let us return. All aisles, both mine and all islands, are actually capes. Because all of you do know, I assume, that islands are actually the tops of mountains. Not as my Uncle Fred used to believe, they don't float. They're not just out there. That Bermuda is actually a mountain, part of the top of a mountain range that connects Bermuda to the United States, to Europe. Hawaii, the islands are not simply floating there, they're not tied down or anchored. It are mountain ranges underneath the waters, wherein all islands are connected with all other land. It is the ocean separating them that one thing appears to be an island. Now back from geography and geology to this, when I said that I started to name them capes and that I did not. There's no such thing as islands, neither on this planet nor otherwise. It is consciousness acting as water that makes things appear to be isles, and they're actually capes. Because everything that appears to be an island, once you get under the water, is connected to all other land. And anything that seems to be an isle is in truth connected to everything else. But OAI consciousness creates the water. Now I guess you see why I didn't name it capes to begin with, or else you wouldn't have had all this time. But that's assuming in my foolish assumptions that when I throw out something of saying, well, I almost named it so-and-so, do people think I'm just talking to myself? Or when I apparently make jokes or I apparently make a fox pass, is it all just humor? But another one that has now become one of our sacred facts, I assume. That is, quote, that life does not grow in a straight line, unquote. I've said it enough, and now you people use it, and it's quoted back to me. What if that weren't necessarily true? What if it were this situation? That if you were in one dimension, or if you're at one level of reality, say in the three-dimensional world where we're conscious, and that which apparently was disjointed and uncertain, that is, life not growing in a straight line, that if you could get into another dimension, it would then appear to be quite direct and knowledgeable. What if that which apparently is incapable of running in a straight line, in a certain line, in an apparently knowledgeable direction as to what it's doing, is true at one level, if you could get into another dimension of being conscious there, but once you subtract it, let us call that a 4D world, since they call this a 3D world, and then you come to a 3D world, and then what you see, without any doubt, as far as consciousness will go, is apparently anything but a straight line. That it is apparently conflicting things, what you used to call forces. Apparently a continuing uncertainty, things going this way and that way. And me saying, don't worry, I assure you I can see that it's all growing. It's all expanding in a positive manner. But you can't look for it, I say, because life doesn't grow in a straight line. What if that's not true? Oh, it's true enough. Those of you who, which I guess includes a lot of you now since I brought up science and particle physics, can any of you sense that life's own yellow circuit, and hence man's own yellow circuit, through what apparently would be two extremes of a physical spectrum, that is particle physics up to cosmology? Some of you know that although it's not their purpose, and they don't see it in the way in which I am using it as a descriptive device, but they are playing now around with mathematical models wherein many people in the world of science are absolutely convinced that the models fit. They answer too many questions, even though they can't produce it. But mathematically, they can construct a model wherein there has got to be other dimensions going on, not in some strange metaphysical way, not in something they dug out of an old book that some drunken British gentleman from the 1800s brought back from Tibet, but that mathematically in an absolutely scientific way, as it would appear, that there has got to be other dimensions going on, and if you begin to just mathematically plug in these kind of models, it's the only thing they can find that fits in much of what seems to be the problems with quantum or particle physics, and plus there seems to be less written about, but what they're beginning to get onto in the world of cosmology, which, as I suggested in my drawing to you of the owls, knee capes of articulation, you remember the last one, they're beginning to wrap up without them knowing it, but they are reflective, they are definitive of this closing up of a particular loop. And both ends of that are beginning to fool around with the notion, the absolute conviction as far as scientific theorems will go, that there have got to be, in truth, other dimensions going on now, or much of what we're doing, if not all of science, no longer makes any sense. Having thought better of it, I guess I'll leave you with that much. I want to mention something that continues to pop up from time to time, and I know that all of you almost are still affected by some of this. And that's the fact that you've got to, I say you've got to, it will become natural once a certain biotic molecular alteration takes place. But many of you have got to go ahead and face up to it now, that you have got to find out the need and even the way that you can act to begin to break what amounts to a not-I generational wiring code. I like the way I always do it, of coming up with these kind of terms, and then whether I say it or not, colon, which sounds like an up-to-date book title that they do nowadays, you know. The claw hammer colon, man's best friend. The need, the possibility to break what amounts to a not-I generational wiring code, colon, not living for your parents, not living for your ancestors. Everything I've ever mentioned about dealing with one's parents was deadly serious. And although I haven't dwelled on it, everyone, even before you got here, had accepted as a fact, at least as a psychological reality in your day and time, that there is some kind of traumatic relationship between me and one or more of my parents, and it is as common as tax cheaters. That it is some kind of psychological something. It is something I've got to deal with. It is something I need to work out. It is something that, at least in the beginning, obviously was my parents' fault. There is a not-I genetic, it's a generational wiring code that's not just between you and your parents. Is why I give you two versions of not living. That was the post-colon part, which does not have anything to do with your intestinal workings. But the post-colon part, I gave you two versions, not living for your parents or not living for your ancestors, because it is certainly not limited to you and your parents. That's the way ordinary consciousness looks at it. But everything I've told you about dealing with your parents, that is, how exceptional they were in the mining sense, in the blood sense. But after that, you've got to cut them loose. And the things that keep popping up that I wanted to, I'd never put it this clearly, but I'm going to tell you very specifically. You cannot, you should not, and you've got to get over this quiet, natural feeling, and it's not psychological, but that you have got to live, or at least please, and answer to your parents. that is as real as it can be in the ordinary factory of things. At the ordinary level, that is as real as it can be. And I have insisted to you on quite pragmatic bases that all of you just had to abandon, at least to shut up, to stop any manifestation of complaints between you and your parents. And I have not stayed personally on everyone's case in this matter, but I know some of you did take it to heart, and you found out that it was almost miraculous results, that some of you wanted to come back and give me your firstborn. But to simply stop arguing with your parents, period. Don't worry about the private voice, but to simply stop arguing with your parents, refuse to gossip with them. And I told some of you quite personally and specifically that it would create almost, as far as you would see it then, an instant miracle. It's like the whole game had changed just over maybe 1.5 visits, one of your periodic visits, that suddenly they would not know why, but the whole game, the whole relationship had changed. And they will shut up. They will quit trying to tell you the terrible things that's happened to the family and the neighbors. And if they will quit asking you, are you still living with that bum with the red beard? Are you still doing so-and-so? That was quite mechanical. And I pointed out to you also that it would harm them not one bit. That it was necessary. But a little more specifically is what I'm trying to point your attention toward is this feeling that is already built in, that is not psychological. It is not personally embedded in you, and it is not something personal that happened to you, of this continual feeling, which remember is simply a biochemical, molecular reaction going on in you, that I in some way have got to please my parents. Regardless of the way the voices put it to you, that will hurt them. My mother would die if she knew what I was doing. My father would die if he knew that I no longer attended services or the temple or the church. If they knew what I really thought nowadays, if they knew what I felt, if they knew some of the things I did, I just don't know the words for it. I just can't do it. It would kill them. I am not saying, as all of you damn well know, that anything that would hurt your parents, they got no business knowing. But you have got no business continuing to live with this built-in, non-I, generational wiring code that is in all of humanity as part of the grid system. That I bet I could break away and do a lot more. I don't wish it, but if my mother would finally die to where I wouldn't have to worry about it, then I could get on with this thing or something else. Then I would become a drag queen in a nightclub and take up the piccolo, or I'd play tuba nude on street corners and pick up sailors. I would write a book on my weird experiences here, but I couldn't do it now. If my mother finally heard about it and read it, it'd kill her. And so I'm just kind of waiting. I don't wish her any ill will, but if she would die, in some way I'd be released. Now, if you believe that, you're still ordinary squared. Because the world has always been filled with people whose parents are dead, and they're still walking around, tied, as they're supposed to be, into this generational wiring code. It is not your responsibility. It's your responsibility, which is child's play, to see to this part. And anybody that thinks this is a problem is still an idiot. You're still not even trying. You should not be doing anything to hurt your parents. And to be able to do that, I repeat, is absolute child's play. It's not even worth discussing anymore. I know that some of you still have voices that wish I wouldn't say that because you would like to take me aside and tell me some particular problem that's been going on for years between you and your mother or father. And you're just still absolutely dumb. That's one area where you are still absolutely tied in to the mechanical, the most mechanical aspect of all electrochemical activity that holds the whole grid together. You are still tied to it because there is no reason, there is no excuse, there is no purpose for you to ever do anything anymore to harm your parents. I mean the slightest way. I mean it takes an absolute genius to be able to do that. is you simply do not engage in the kind of idle chit-chat to start with that you always have with your parents. As I said, it takes you all of one real good trip home to do that. That's all it takes. It will put a shock into the whole system that they start wanting to know what's going on with you, and instead of you playing out that same energy transfer dance, as you stop it, and you can non-verbally and non-hostilely, you can do it with your parents easier than anyone, because it apparently is worse. As you can establish, it'll take you once or twice, it can take you all of 5 minutes, that you are no longer going to do that. No explanation. It takes an absolute wide-awake genius to be able to do this, is you stop it. And never again do you ever do anything that hurts them. They ask you, are you still doing so-and-so? And I don't care if you're doing it 23 hours a day and you only see her once a year. You say, no. Good grief, I hadn't thought about that. No. Phew. And that's the end of it. You don't do anything to encourage their mechanical suffering. You're not trying to enlighten them. They're not attempting to do this thing. But they are the easiest people in the world to not harm, because you simply break up the energy transfer that has always been extant, has already been generationally wired between you and them, and you stop it. And it's no absolute promise, but I have pointed out to you people, it's one of the few times in life that you can absolutely set up a situation wherein another person has an immediate beneficial possibility to learn something. It's not necessarily they will, but your parents will forever feel better. They won't know why. They'll almost become, I've said this before and I still hesitate, but they almost become frightened of you. Not in a recoiling sense, but it's like a kind of respect, and they feel no threat from you. You will not engage in hostility. You will not even be a passive participant when they say, ooh, do you remember so-and-so that used to live next door to us? Let me tell you what happened. If you have to, verbally, the first time or two, you say, no, I can smell what you're going to say. I don't want to hear that about her. Hey, do I smell blueberry muffins in there? Ooh, put your arm around her and push her in the kitchen. They'll take once or twice, and they'll stop it. They try one more time. They just can't help it. They start to say, oh, you remember your old Uncle George that was, always used to smoke so much? Let me tell you. You can just look. And they'll stop it. But they want to start asking you, are you still doing what you used to do? In other words, playing mother and father. I mean, mother and son, or father and son, or daughter. And you refuse in a non-hostile way. And I repeat, you can do it with your parents, and in fact is more efficient, is quicker than you can with non-parents, non-blood kin. But you stop that. You stop that kind of transfer, that kind of energy dance between you two. But then you've got to see and free yourself from, I've got to live for them. What would they think? And it won't stop as long as you're a part of that grid system. It won't stop just because they die. Nothing stops just because it mechanically dies. The only thing that can stop it is if you can willfully, if you know how, is for you to kill something in you, for you to break up a kind of mechanically established energy transfer. That's the only way that anything resembles being killed. Since I haven't done it in a while, and since some of you seem to like it, and since some of you are now being able to do it yourself, and I like to hear them from you, but some more of these about what seems to be going on in life. I've mentioned this in one or two other ways, but how about the once, not too far distantly removed from today, cry of personal computers in every home, in every little child's bedroom, and now most of those companies are out of business. Can anyone see that as being life temporarily blinded by its own yellow circuit excitement. Or, does anyone remember this? And then not too hoary distance again was the threatened change in certain parts of the world, including this one, the forefront of civilization, the threat all across the board to go to the metric system. Everybody remember that? Can anyone see that as life being temporarily overcome by a fit of tidiness? So we continually had government officials and educators pointing out that it's only us, and I guess Great Britain, were the two primary culprits. Everybody else, the whole scientific world, the whole civilized world's on the metric system. And it's like, you never been through this? Sure you have. I'm going to put a task on, and I'm going to cut the tape. The task, and don't, of course, use just the obvious, but see on your own for the next week. You've got to really refine this. Well, you know that, or it won't be worthwhile to you. Of what areas, what things, what activities could you see that might be unnecessary for you that would be using up AMV12? It does not have to be just the activity per se, but the degree to which you seem to be continually involved. Or it could be the whole activity. That it might be, for you, an unnecessary use of a certain substance.